All right, so we're going to be in chapter 2 now. Of Daniel. We did the first part of chapter 2 the last time I was with you, but that's been a couple weeks ago. So let's kind of do a quick little refresher course on what's taking place. So Daniel is in Babylon. And he is in the service of the king. He is one of, I guess you might say, the wise men of the court. Who's the king of Babylon at this time? Nebuchadnezzar, that's right. And so Nebuchadnezzar has a dream, all right? And he goes to the wise men, and he says to them, I want you to interpret this dream for me. It's keeping me awake at night. I know there's a message in it. I don't know what it means. And they say to him, sure, king, but first what? You tell us the dream, and we'll be happy to interpret to you. And what does Nebuchadnezzar say? No, the only way I'll know that you really are for real, that you're legitimate, is you have to tell me the dream, and then, if you get that right, then I'll know when you tell me the interpretation that you're telling me the truth. And what do they say? Nobody can do that. That's impossible. And so Nebuchadnezzar says, you're all a bunch of fakes, and I'm going to kill y'all. And so the wheels are set in motion to put all of the wise men of the court to death in Babylon. Now, word of this gets to Daniel. Daniel says, hey, man, this is my very, very loose translation of this. Hey, man, why are you wanting to kill us? And so the servant of the king says, well, because the king has had a dream and no one is able to interpret it, and he blames the wise men, and so everybody's going to die. And he says, well, if you give me a little time, I can interpret the king's dream. And so he is given the opportunity to hear the dream. Well, not to hear the dream. He's given the opportunity to appear before the king, and he's going to have the same deal made to him. If Daniel can tell the king, the dream and the interpretation, then he'll believe it, and the wise men will be saved. All right? So that's kind of a very, very quick catching up of where we were. So let's pick up from there. Chapter 2, verse 17. Daniel 2, verse 17. Then Daniel went to his house and made the decision known to Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, his companions, that they might seek mercies from God of heaven concerning this secret, so that Daniel and his companions might not perish with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. Then the secret was revealed to Daniel in a night vision. So Daniel blessed the God of heaven, and Daniel answered and said, blessed be the name of God forever and ever, for wisdom and might are his. And he changes the times and the seasons. He removes kings and raises up kings. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to those who have understanding. He reveals deep, excuse me. He reveals deep and secret things. He knows what is in the darkness, and light dwells with him. I thank you and praise you, O God of my fathers. You have given me wisdom and might, and have made known to me what we asked of you. For you have made known to us the king's demand. Okay, so Daniel goes to his house, his quarters, and he tells his friends, Mishael, Hananiah, and Azariah. Now, we know them better as what? Right. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. We know them by that name because of the fiery furnace incident that we'll get to a little later on in our study of Daniel. We're given here the Hebrew names, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They're Babylonian names that they were given when they were taken into captivity. But that's who we're talking to. We're talking about the same people that are going to be in the fiery furnace just a few chapters over. So Daniel is praying, and he wants God to reveal the secret. What's the secret that he wants revealed? Yeah, he wants the dream and the interpretation. Can't be enough just to have the interpretation. Got to have the dream and the interpretation for the king to be able to believe it. And the young men, Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah, or Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, if you prefer, they're praying that God would be merciful, that God would give mercy. Why do they pray for mercy? Yeah, because their life is on the line. If Daniel can't interpret this, then they're all going to die. Not just Daniel, but all of the wise men of the court, this including Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So all of their necks are on the line. They're all counting on Daniel to be able to, by the power of God, interpret this dream. And God reveals the answer that Daniel needs in the dream and the interpretation. And so beginning in about verse 20, Daniel begins to praise God. He is praising, he prayed and God answered, and now he's praising God for wisdom and power, and for granting wisdom and power to men. So he says, God, you have wisdom and power, wisdom and might, and you give wisdom to the wise and knowledge to the understanding. So he's saying, God, I praise you that you have the wisdom and the power, but I also praise you that you've chosen to give those things to man, specifically to me. Otherwise, me and my friends are going to die. So he praises God for that. I've got an allergy thing going. It's not the COVIDs, I promise. It's a different world we live in. You sneeze now and people look at you like you've, taken the Lord's name in vain or something. But it's just allergies, I promise. So questions on that. We're fixing to get to the really interesting part of this whole thing. And I'm going to give you a chance to see some of my tremendous artwork. I've referenced my artwork for you before. I don't know if you've gotten to see it firsthand, but tonight I'm kicking it old school, and I've got a flashback from 1975 with the old overhead projector there. I'm about as old school as they get. I'm the guy that when you talk about cutting and pasting for your sermon, I literally cut and paste. I cut with a pair of scissors and taped, stuff on for my sermon notes. So, but we'll get to that in just a bit. Okay, so we're all anxious to hear what the dream is, right? Y'all don't look sufficiently anxious enough. All right, let's take a look. Here we go. Verse 24. Therefore Daniel went to Arioch, whom the king had appointed to destroy the wise men of Babylon. And he went and said thus to him, Do not destroy the wise men of Babylon. Take me before the king, and I will tell the king the interpretation. And then Arioch quickly brought Daniel before the king and said thus to him, I have found a man of the captives of Judah who will make known to the king the interpretation. And the king answered and said to Daniel, whose name was Belteshazzar. Now see, we get Daniel's Babylonian name referenced here. Are you able to make known to me the dream which I have seen and its interpretation? And Daniel answered in the presence of the king and said, The secret which the king has demanded, the wise men, the astrologers, the magicians, and the soothsayers cannot declare to the king. In other words, man can't do it. Verse 28. But there is a God in heaven who reveals secrets, and he has made known to King Nebuchadnezzar what will be in the latter days. Your dream and the visions of your head upon your bed were these. As for you, O king, thoughts came to your mind while on your bed about what would come to pass after this. And he who reveals secrets has made known to you what will be. But as for me, this secret has not been revealed to me because I have more wisdom than anyone living, but for our sakes who make known the interpretation to the king, and that you may know the thoughts of your heart. You, O king, were watching, and behold, a great image. This great image, whose splendor was excellent, stood before you, and its form was awesome. This image's head was of fine gold, its chest and arms of silver, and its belly and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and partly of clay. You watched while a stone was cut out with hands, which struck the image on its feet of iron and clay and broke them in pieces. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold were crushed together and became like chaff from the summer threshing floors. The wind carried them away so that no trace of them was found, and the stone that struck the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. Fred told me on the way in, said that wasn't a dream, that was maybe that was Danny told me, said that was a dream, that was a nightmare. No wonder he couldn't sleep. That's probably true. So we get, and this is the parts of Daniel that get people excited generally, because Daniel says to him that God is making known to him what? Verse 28, what will be in the latter days? I mean, isn't that what kind of gets us excited? We want to know. I mean, tell us something about the future. Tell us how it's going to end. Tell us what it's going to look like. So this dream of Nebuchadnezzar is going to give a little glimpse into what that's going to look like. And those are the kind of things, and there's several parts of Daniel that give those little glimpses. You don't get a clear picture, but you get glimpses of what it's going to look like in the latter days. So, what does Daniel say when he's asked if he can reveal the dream? What does he say? Nobody can do that, but God can. Now, the point of Daniel says, the point of the king's dream was that God is revealing what's going to happen in the future, in the latter days. True or false? Daniel says the dream was revealed to him because of his wisdom. That's false. He says it's not because I'm any smarter than anybody else, but because God wants the king to understand the dream. You got to love the humility of Daniel here. He's standing before the king. He can do something that nobody else in the whole kingdom can. He can interpret the king's dream. Not just the dream, but also he can tell what the dream was and the interpretation. And he said, King, it's not because I'm any smarter than anybody else. It's just that God's enabled me to do this because he wants you to know the future, and he wants to save, me and the people you're trying to put to death, but he wants you to know what's coming in the future. All right. We'll read the interpretation of the dream, and then we'll go back and we'll draw this crazy thing that the king. And you get to see my wonderful artwork there. So you'll understand why I'm a preacher and not an artiste. But anyway, all right. Let's. Okay. One of the things my grandpa told me before he died was never take yourself too seriously. So I do things like drawing these goofy things just to make sure I'm keeping up with what Grandpa told me to do. So let's read this interpretation, because without Daniel's interpretation of it, who would be able to? Could any of it? Now, if you've read the story, you know what the interpretation is, perhaps. But who, just hearing this dream, could have come up with the interpretation. God alone can do that. So we need Daniel's help through the power of God to interpret this thing for us. So verse 36, this is the dream. Now we will tell the interpretation of it before the king. You, O king, are a king of kings. For the God of heaven has given you a kingdom, power, strength, and glory. And wherever the children of men dwell, or the beasts of the field and the birds of the heavens, he has given them into your hand and has made you ruler over them all. You are this head of gold. Did I read the whole? Yeah, we did that. Yeah, okay. I'm still on. My brain is still messed up sometimes. Verse 39. But after you shall arise another kingdom inferior to yours, then another, a third kingdom of bronze, which shall rule over all the earth. And the fourth kingdom shall be as strong as iron, inasmuch as iron breaks in pieces and shatters everything. And like iron that crushes, that kingdom will break in pieces and crush all the others. Whereas you saw the feet and toes, partly of potter's clay and partly of iron, the kingdom shall be divided, yet the strength of the iron shall be in it, just as you saw the iron mixed with ceramic clay. And as the toes of the feet were partly of iron and partly of clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly fragile. You saw iron mixed with ceramic clay. They will mingle with the seed of men, but they will not adhere to one another, just as iron does not mix with clay. And in the days of these kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed, and the kingdom shall not be left to other people. It shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. Inasmuch as you saw that the stone was cut out of the mountain without hands, and that it broke in pieces the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold, the great God has made known to the king what will come to pass after this. The dream is certain and its interpretation is sure. Okay, so now we know exactly what it means, right? Everybody got it down? All right, let's see if we can figure it out. It's not really as complicated as what we might first think. I'm going to go up here to my old school 1975 Snap-O-Matic, whatever you call this thing here, overhead projector. Somebody left me a Hershey bar. I don't think so. All right, let's see if I can get this thing up and rolling. We're gonna attempt to draw this thing. All right. So, and you all are going to help me. All right. So he begins describing this thing. So we get, first of all, let's go back to where he's first describing it. The image, it's apparently an image that's supposed to look like a man or a human of some sort, albeit the craziest looking one perhaps that you've ever seen. And so it's got various body parts made of different materials. So he starts with the head, all right? So let's see if I can, where's my, oh, don't do that. Hang on.
Gonna come down.
I'm up on the ceiling? Okay, all right. Now we're cooking with gas. Here, let's make him a happy little monster, all right? We'll give him a little hat, all right? Now, how about that? Now, the head is supposed to be made out of what? Gold. All right? Then he comes down and the chest and arms, all right? Here's an arm. Here's an arm. How about that? And that's what? Not iron. Who said iron? Silver, right? All right. Now, its belly and thighs are of bronze. Okay, so I'm not sure. We're going to make him look like he's wearing short pants, but that's really not going to be the case. This is going to be belly and thighs, and that's bronze, all right? Okay, boy, we're doing good. Now, the legs, I can't make him too long-legged or he'll run off of the page there. There's his legs. And they are going to be what? Iron, right? Now, then we get to his feet. I made him a little bow-legged, but that's okay. His feet are kind of a mixed consistency. So half of them are going to be made out of what? Iron. And then half of them is going to be made out of clay. All right. How's that? That don't look very good, does it? It's not very... Well, he looks happy anyway. He's a happy monster, okay? All right. Now let's come back and let's talk about what we got here. We may need to turn the lights back on so we can see what we're doing here. All right, so what immediately stands out about the material that this statue thing is made out of? So you're going gold, silver, bronze, iron, clay. What immediately can you tell me about that? And my shoes untied. It's the weakest. It's also what? It's the least valuable. That's right. So you're starting with the most valuable, gold, and you're working your way down to the least valuable of clay. So you got two things that we notice right off the bat. It becomes less valuable as you move down the statue, and as you get to the feet, the clay would have been brittle and it would have been easily broken. So whatever it is that this is supposed to represent, the top, the head, is supposed to be the premier, and then it kind of works down in value from there. And then the most fragile is the feet, the last one. So if you start with the head, then the most fragile would be the feet, or the last one. Now, that's just the statue. That's only part of the vision. What's the other part of the vision? All right, this huge rock. Remember that part of it? This huge rock is hewn out of the mountain, and it flies into the feet of this statue, and it crushes the statue. The statue is just disintegrated, and all of the dust of the statue just blows away. And then what happens to the rock? It becomes this huge mountain that encompasses the whole earth. Let's look at this again. Verse 34, you watched while a stone was cut out without hands, which struck the image on its feet of iron and clay and broke them in pieces. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold were crushed together, became like chaff from the summer threshing floor. The wind carried them away so that no trace of them was found, and the stone that struck the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. So this rock is miraculously hewn out and is thrust into the feet of this statue. And not just the feet, but the whole statue disintegrates, blows away in the wind, and the mountain grows and becomes this mighty mountain. The rock grows into this mighty mountain that fills the whole earth. And that's the dream that Nebuchadnezzar has. And so that's what Daniel has to interpret. So you understand now why, Nebuchadnezzar didn't know what in the world it was supposed to mean, why it probably kept him up at night. Some things about the rock that seem unique. One is that its origin was supernatural. It's cut without hands. In other words, this is by supernatural means this rock is hewn out, not with any tool of man. It has extraordinary power. It annihilates this entire statue, not just the feet where it hits, but the entire statue. And its scope is worldwide. It becomes this mountain that fills the whole earth. So whatever this stone represents, it's worldwide in nature, the scope of it is. All right. Exciting stuff, right? Got ideas of what it is? Some of you do. Well, yeah, what it all is, but...
Well, it's talking about 4 different kingdoms. They're going to rule the earth, and it's
That's right. You've done this before, haven't you? That's right. So, according to Daniel's interpretation that he gives the king Nebuchadnezzar, what does he say the parts of the statue represent? And not the stone, just the statue. What does he say they represent? Kingdoms, right. He said they're kingdoms. Verse... You, O King, are the King of Kings. You are the head. So he starts in verse 38, describing these 4 kingdoms. Who does Daniel say? So, in order to get this, in order to have any kind of idea what kingdoms they are, you could do anything. You could say, well, 4 kingdoms. They're America, Russia, China, and Brazil. Well, I don't know why I said Brazil. I was just pulling it forth. It could be anything, right? So you got to have some sort of starting point, some sort of frame of reference. And so thankfully Daniel gives us that. And he's talking to Nebuchadnezzar, and who does he say is that first kingdom of gold? Yeah, so he says, you, Nebuchadnezzar, are the head of gold. And so Nebuchadnezzar was the king of what nation? Babylon. So it's like working a puzzle. So I like this kind of stuff because it's like working an algebraic expression or a puzzle. You put the pieces together and you solve for X kind of thing. So Daniel gives us the kingdom to start with. So it's Babylon is the kingdom of gold, the head, all right? Then you move down from there. Now we're moving to kingdoms that take place after Nebuchadnezzar. Because remember, he tells Daniel that God is Daniel tells Nebuchadnezzar, God is giving you what's going to happen down the road, in the future. So we're not working backwards, we're going to be working forward. So Daniel isn't giving us those names. Instead, he's telling us that there are 4 kingdoms that will arise after that. Now, here's where a good Bible student doesn't take it upon himself to try to start coming up with kingdoms and names, because then you can really get out in left field. So what you do is you go to the scholars that have studied this and done this for, 2,500 years or however little this prophecy is. I had a theology professor say one time, if you are reading Scripture and you come up with an interpretation that no one else has ever come up with before, chances are you're wrong. There's a lot of truth to that. So we want to look to what most scholars would say these other three kingdoms are. And fortunately, I think it's fortunate, most scholars agree. There's always some body that calls himself a scholar that's way out in left field, that's got some alternate idea. But most conservative scholars that are worth their salt agree on what the next three kingdoms are. And so they're going to go in succession from the fall of Babylon to the rise of the next kingdom, and its fall to the rise of the next kingdom, to its fall to the rise of the next kingdom. So after Babylon, who came into power? The Medes and the Persians, that's right. Now, you can do it, and there have been some scholars that wanted to break that apart and have the Medes be the chest and arms, and the Persians be the belly and thighs. The problem is then that puts the legs of iron being grease, and you really, in context and looking at the other apocalyptic type scriptures, it seems clear that the kingdom of iron is a reference to Rome. So in other words, in order for Rome to be number 4, the Medes Persians need to be one. And really they kind of were part of the same kingdom. Medes and Persians, they really were sort of the same kingdom. So most scholars are going to say your chest and arms of silver represent the kingdom of the Medes and the Persians. Then your belly and thighs of bronze would be what kingdom? Greece. Alexander the Great, Greece. And then that leaves the fourth one, the legs of iron, being what kingdom? Rome. Okay, that's significant. What was the kingdom in power at the time that Christ was born? Rome. So, now there is some, so that carries us down through the first 4, the gold, the bronze, the iron, the head, the chest, the thighs, the legs. And like I said, there's pretty good consensus among scholars that that's who we're talking about. We're talking about Babylon, the Medes and the Persians, Greece, and Rome. Now, there is some disagreement when you get to the feet. Because it's a little more after Rome. Now we've got something that's a little weirder. And now we've got this other kingdom that somehow it has iron in it. So in some way it seems to be tied to the fourth kingdom of Rome, but it's different. It's got other stuff mixed in it. It's got clay mixed in it. So it's fragile, and it's a mixture of things, and yet it's some way tied to Rome. And so it's divided. Daniel says it's a kingdom divided, and yet somehow united in its reign. So there's really two ways you can take this, 2 probable interpretations, 2 interpretive options, I guess you can say. One is to take it that the feet refer to ancient Rome, perhaps at the time, in and around the time of Christ's birth, the first coming of Christ. And Rome, we know, was a divided nation. When Herod the Great died, his kingdom was divided amongst his 4 sons. So in some ways you can say Rome was a divided kingdom. The other interpretive option is to see not Rome in Jesus' day, but rather a future kingdom that will arise prior to the return of Christ, that will apparently in some way be tied to Rome, but be different, contain more elements, contain more parts, more alliances perhaps, and yet somehow rise in the strength of Rome, but be different than ancient Rome. Yes, ma'am. Yeah, you're saying the kingdom of the Roman Empire would rise again. I mean, yeah, I think that's kind of what's being said. Although what seems to be implied here is that it won't just be the old Roman Empire revived. It will be in some way like it, maybe containing some of the same elements, but it will be different. It will be unique from that. Well, right, and I mean, you're taking that probably from passages in Revelation where with the beast that's wounded and all that, which is beyond the scope of what we've got here. We've just got this kingdom, this last kingdom that either must be a reference to ancient Rome in the time of Christ, or a reference to this future kingdom that will arise in the likeness and power of ancient Rome, but yet be different and will arise prior to the return of Christ. Now, the great rock, we've already said, represents who? Yeah, Jesus, and the coming of God's kingdom. So the great rock that comes to smash into the kingdoms of the world and destroy them is a reference, and it seems clear enough. There's really not a lot of debate on this. It seems clear enough that it's a reference to Christ's coming and his reign, the coming of God's kingdom through Christ. Now, do you take the mystery of the feet? Do you take it to be ancient Rome at the time of Christ's birth, or do you take it to be this future kingdom prior to the return of Christ? How do you decide that? Okay, it's not willy-nilly. You take it, your understanding of that is going to depend on whether you take the rock to represent the first coming of Christ or the second coming of Christ. And that's really the only thing that makes the difference. If you take this rock that is hewn out as the first advent of Christ, the first coming of Christ, when Jesus is born in Bethlehem and crucified on the cross and resurrected, if you take that to be the reference to the rock, then it's a reference to Rome at the time of Jesus' birth and death, and that through the power of the gospel, the kingdoms of the earth have fallen. The kingdoms of the world have been defeated, and evil has been defeated through the power of Christ and the cross. If you take it to be the second coming of Christ, then it must be a future kingdom that will arise like the old Roman Empire, and yet different. And the rock that strikes this kingdom, and all of the kingdoms of the world fall. And what is that beautiful passage in Revelation? The kingdoms of this world have become the kingdoms of our God and of His Christ, and He will reign forever and ever. So how you take that, And I'm not here to tell you how to take it. I'm just saying that how you interpret the rock will determine what you believe the feet to be. I will tell you that I tend to lean towards the fact that I think it's a reference to the second coming of Christ. Daniel tells Nebuchadnezzar that God is showing him what will take place in the latter days. That tends to mean short, at or around the return of Christ. So I tend to take it to be a reference to the second coming of Christ. And so because of that, I tend to take the reference to the feet as a future kingdom that will arise in the likeness of the Roman Empire, but yet different, that will arise prior to the return of Christ, that will be ultimately defeated at his coming. So let me pause there, see if you have questions, maybe ideas, thoughts, things we haven't talked about. Yes, ma'am.
I just think it's interesting that he didn't start with clay and go down through the body and end with Jesus Christ being the bull.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that...
But yet that's not how our Lord is.
Right, right.
I just think, goodness, why did he do that?
The king. The idea is more of the wealth of the nations as they progress through. Babylon being, this extravagant thing. Not that Rome wasn't, but it's just more having more to do with the kingdoms themselves diminishing in their overall worth and value, but becoming more powerful, because as you move down, gold being one of the more soft and easily malleable metals, when getting down to iron, that's if you're going to war, I don't want a sword made out of gold. I want a sword made out of iron, because it's more power. It's stronger and more powerful, and so that's kind of the idea moving down. But main point is the rock, Jesus, destroys them all. Okay, so this final kingdom that we're talking about, some of the things that we can say for certain. There's a lot of things about this we can't say for certain. We can give speculation, ideas, interpretive options. Some of the things that we can say with some certainty, it will be a divided kingdom. It's iron mixed with clay, and so. It's dividing, perhaps alliances that they're unified, perhaps with the purpose of uniting the world, but yet there's still division there. Well, I think that's what it's a reference to. That and the events surrounding, maybe not just Armageddon, but certainly that would play into it. Yeah. Right. Secondly, it'll be powerful. There's iron mixed. It's primarily iron. In some ways, it'll be fragile because there's clay mixed in this. So I'm running y'all over, and I'm sorry about that. And in some ways, it's connected to the fourth kingdom. In some ways, it's connected to that kingdom of iron, that Rome. And then fifth, we can say that it's ultimately destroyed by the coming of Christ. So those are things that we can say for certain. You know, there's just some mysterious things. If you look in verse 43, you saw iron mixed with ceramic clay. They will mingle with the seed of men, but they will not adhere to one another. What does that mean? You know, there's a lot of, again, interpretive options, but no clear, nothing that really is compelling, and even among the commentaries that I looked at. Some say, well, it could be, a reference to the Roman Empire that mixed with the barbarian tribes and was weakened. Some say, well, it could be these alliances that were, where they were sealed with marriages. Which that happened sometimes in those days. Some would say, well, it harkens back to Genesis in the time of the flood, where references the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were fair. So some would say, well, the true religion is mixed in with false religion. The Christianized Roman Empire under Constantine is mixed in with the religions of the world, but it doesn't really blend. It doesn't replace the true religion. But false religion prevails. It could even be something more ominous than that. It could be a reference to something like these human kings make an alliance with something that isn't human. In other words, demonic. So it's just there's more questions than answers here, but it brings up some intriguing questions. But the things that we can say for certain is that these four kingdoms will be followed by a fifth kingdom that is different and yet similar, that is in some ways very powerful and united, but in yet some other ways very disjointed, and is fragile in some ways. And Christ, the rock, at his return, if you take it to refer to his return, will destroy not only the fourth kingdom, but all the kingdoms of the world will come under the lordship of Christ. So, anyone want to take a shot of summarizing the meaning of the dream? I think I just kind of did, didn't I? Let me read you what I said. After Babylon, a series of kingdoms will arise, culminating in a final kingdom that will be destroyed at the coming of Christ, whose kingdom will be eternal and encompass the whole earth. So that's the basic message of it. After Babylon, a series of kingdoms will arise, culminating in a final kingdom that will be destroyed at the coming of Christ, whose kingdom will be eternal and encompass the whole earth. Then I'll give you a couple of little application questions. What does the story teach about prayer? Well, remember, Daniel and his friends prayed about that, and God gave him the interpretation of the dream. So I think faith in the midst of it. Crisis, and this is important to hear at a time like this, crisis is the time for prayer, not the time for worry. Remember to thank God for answering prayer, as Daniel and his friends did. What encouragement do we draw from the story? There is a God who's in control when all human strength fails. Well, we need to hear that today too, don't we? And Christ's kingdom will prevail, and good will triumph over evil. So I think those are some good practical things that we can take out of this. Questions or comments? I know we kind of rushed through that, and I still ran over, but anyway. We get to catch this again in chapter 7. Different dream, same basic message. So we get to kind of expound on it in chapter 7. Appreciate y'all being here tonight. Let's close in a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you for your word. Thank you for the chance to study tonight. Lord, bless us. God, thank you for the